This story is called Great-Grandfather George. I don't really know quite how to put this. In one sense, I never knew my great-grandfather, George Bradshaw, because he died in November 1919. He succumbed to the great influenza pandemic that followed the First World War. Yet, I can also say that I've known great-grandpa as long back as I can remember. Certainly to the days of my earliest childhood. In fact, he's been a guide and confidant all my life. My first such recollection occurred when I was about 4 years old. I was playing by the stream that ran at the bottom of our property, and out of the sight of my older sister Joyce, who was nominally looking after me. I slipped on the muddy bank and fell in. At that age I'd not learned to swim yet. I was in danger of being swept away, probably to my death. A voice came in quite clearly. "Georgie," it said, "hold on to that tree root and don't let go till your sister comes." That's what I did, and when Joyce arrived, she pulled me out, wet and muddy, back onto the grass. Of course, there was hell to pay when we reached the house, as is typical when parental adrenaline is caused to spike by the misadventure of one of their children. Joyce had the worst of it, of course. "I told you," said my mother, "I told you not to let Georgie out of your sight, even for a minute. And what do? You leave him alone, he goes and falls in the water. He could have drowned and it would have been your fault. And look at his clothes. How do you think I'm going to get all that mud out of them?" I did not escape completely unscathed. "How many times have I told you not to go near the water? What if Joyce hadn't come along? What would have happened then?" "Well, I hung on to the tree root, just like he told me, till Joyce came," I replied. "Hung on to the tree root? Who told you?" "I don't know, but you sounded real old." By the time I was 8 or 9, I had learned the identity of the man who was real old. "I've got a special bond with you, Georgie," he said to me one day. "I'm called George, just like you. In fact, everyone back in our family in my day was called George till me. I know there were 4 others before me. George V, I call myself, just like the king." He laughed. I had no idea who the king called George could be. "I don't know any king, and I don't know one called George, that's for sure. It's a queen, but she's called Elizabeth," I said. "Ah, then," he replied, "I'm going to have to broaden your education. You don't know it, but I'm your great-grandfather. But just call me George, it'll be easier that way. I'll be George and you're Georgie." "Okay," I said cautiously. Gradually, I came to know more about this strange person who would visit me from time to time. Not that I ever saw him as a vision, he was always just a voice. I guess that's the way the Almighty told the Old Testament prophets what to say. George was born what seemed to me to be an incredibly long time ago. 1898, he told me. Even at that time, it was nearly a century before. "Were you a soldier in the First World War?" I asked him one day. "Aye, that I was," he replied. "I was in the Great War, but truth to tell, I don't like to talk about war too much. I saw too many things there that no man's eyes should ever have had to have seen." I was a bit surprised that he called it the Great War. But after what he'd said, I didn't like to ask about whether he'd been a soldier in the Second World War as well. There were other things about Great-Grandpa George I was not prepared to talk about, and the truth of the situation came to me only very gradually. I was about 9. I was very excited to tell my great-grandfather about the coming Olympic Games in Montreal. Although George seemed to know all about me, he was strangely oblivious to things that seemed obvious to me. "Montreal, that's in Canada, right? I had a brother, Arthur, who went to Canada, went to a place called Alberta. I do believe that's in the West. He was a miner and he went out there because the pay was good in the coal mines, better than it was here in Yorkshire. Of course, he came back here when the war started and took the king's shilling. Went over to France, he did. Got gas to eat, the poor fellow. Came home, but his lungs were shot to pieces. I wonder what happened to him. How do you mean what happened to him? Did your brother live a long way away from you? No, but I kind of lost touch with everyone after 1919. The flu, you see. That was the way it was at Oakland in 1919. What was the depression like for you? How did your family manage? Well, a lot of the lads were very depressed after the war. They were depressed that things didn't seem to get any better than before, even though we'd been told we were making a land fit for heroes to live in. Others got depressed, I suppose you might call it, over the shell shock. They couldn't forget all the noise they'd had to put up with day and night. No, George, what I meant was the depression when everyone lost their jobs in the 1930s. Sorry, I don't remember anything about depression like that. Do you remember the coronation? Oh yes, though I was pretty young at the time, you know. I remember we got a day off from school and they gave all of us children special cups and saucers with the faces of King George and Queen Mary on them. I don't remember what happened to mine though. Finally it clicked. My grandfather had died in the influenza pandemic of 1919. Had no knowledge of any events later than that. Great-grandfathers flitted in and out throughout my life. There's always been a present at potentially significant forks in the road. I'd had a particularly serious quarrel with my parents over wanting to get tickets for an Everly Brothers concert, despite a spectacularly poor report card from school. I flounced out of the house intending to run away to live with my Uncle Jack. Not that he ever invited me. As I stalked off down the front path, I sensed George beside me and heard him speak. Well, laddie, what's up with you here? A few moments later, you might want just to think about this through one more time, Georgie. Let's walk together a bit. I know how you feel right now. I did the same thing when I was a lad of your age. I was going to walk to my granddad's house, which was about 20 miles away. I got lost and it was cold, and it started to rain. After a bit I was really hungry, and I thought I could just sneak into a baker's and steal a sausage roll. Of course I got caught, but there was this other customer who looked at me and said, "What's up with you, sonny? You look cold. Are you really hungry?" And she put 2 pennies on the counter and told the baker that she would pay for the sausage roll. Then she asked where I lived and why I was so far from home. In the end, she fed me supper. Took me home in her pony and trap. My mum and dad were really good about it. I thought I'd get a thrashing, but I just thanked the lady for bringing me home. When she left, they just said they were glad that I'd come back safe-like. Then George went silent. In my mind, he disappeared, and I was left to think about what to do. So I went home. I guess that I appreciated home a bit better after that. Despite his comments about not talking about the Great War, George was a mine of fascinating information about some parts of it. He had joined up as soon as he was 18 in August of 1916. He never talked about the horrors of trench warfare and the constant shelling, but he did tell me on one occasion how he'd been captured and taken prisoner of war. Unlike the terrible privations of prisoners of war I'd read about in World War II, my great-grandfather told me his captors had treated him well. The high point of his incarceration occurred right after he was captured, he said, when the prisoners were taken to the camp. They were stripped naked, their clothes were taken away, and all their body hair was shaved off. And they were given showers with carbolic soap. It was wonderful, he said. Finally, after months in the trenches, we were free of lice. I can tell you we were no worse off than the rest of the German population. I was part of a party that was sent to a farm. In the spring of 1918, we went into the fields and planted potatoes by hand. We were always hungry, but so were the men who were guarding us. They were just the same. I recall one time when my great-grandfather did not take my side. Afterwards, I was glad I took his advice. I was in my late 20s and I had been going out with a girl called Laura Malone. Laura was turquoise, blue-eyed, blonde and bubbly. Lots of fun. Parties by us till all hours. After all, we were in our 20s and Laura was hot. I'd fallen for Laura pretty hard. I was seriously thinking that I should propose to her. We seemed to be really well suited as a couple. We'd even taken a Caribbean all-inclusive vacation together. Then one day, George was at my side, figuratively speaking. As always, when about to dish out advice, he came straight to the point. "Georgie, about this girl Laura you've been seeing." "Yes, what about her?" "Do you think she's the one for you?" "Yes, I'd even been thinking that we should get married." "You both seem to spend a lot of money partying and so forth." "Yes," I replied a bit defensively. "I'm keeping well within my budget. I can't see the problem with us enjoying ourselves." "Oh, it's not you I'm worrying about, it's Laura." "Where do you think she's getting all that spending money? She's only temping as a receptionist right now, isn't she?" "Oh, I suppose so. I hadn't really thought about it too much." "Well, before you do anything you might regret, laddie, think about it a bit harder. That's what I'm saying." And that was it. His words stuck with me. I couldn't help it. I started to wonder where Laura was getting her part of the money we spent so freely. I tried making oblique inquiries, but she got really defensive. "It's my money and I'll spend it how I like." Then she added, "Plenty more where that came from." That last comment was what really got me thinking. How could someone working for a temp agency have plenty more where that came from? "What do you mean?" I asked. At that point, Laura changed the subject abruptly. I started one sip of my pants. With the inevitable result, the question was set aside. It was not forgotten. Without even wanting to, I couldn't help noticing Laura's extravagance more closely. I began to wonder whether it would be such a good idea to marry someone as spendthrift as Laura seemed to be. And gradually, the passion in our relationship cooled. We parted on good terms, but I noticed that Laura took no time before launching into another, apparently equally passionate romance. Much later, Laura was caught up in a sting for selling cocaine to an up-and-coming MP. It's a sordid scenario, featured prominently online and in the tabloid press, which was where I found out about it, at the supermarket checkout. I know that face. Pictures of Laura and the MP stared out at me from the front page. MP and busty gal pal and coke bust. You may remember the event. It was a 9 days wonder in the news media, and it put an end to the MP's hopes of a cabinet position. Thank you, great-grandpa. You saved my hide on that one. Great-grandpa was much more positive when I met Sarah. "What a nice young lady I see you're going out with now, Georgie. If I were your age, I'd snap her up myself. Make sure you don't let this one get away." And when we announced our engagement, he said wistfully, "How I'd like to come to the party." So I replied, "Come off it, George, I know that you'll be there." And he was, but complained good-naturedly about the fact that I hadn't offered him a drink all evening. Of course, that's a little hard to do when your accuser is only a disembodied voice. Last week I said to him, "George, is it possible for you to speak to more than one person? I'd really like Sarah to get to know you, and I'm sure that she would like to know you too." "I don't know," he said. "I never heard of such a thing, but for all that I've never heard about it, doesn't mean it isn't possible. How do you think that Sarah would feel? Have you ever told her about me?" I hadn't. What if Sarah thinks I'm a mental case? I have to put my thinking cap on about this. Perhaps I'll raise the subject when I get back from my conference in Windsor. I'm driving down tomorrow. I hope the traffic won't be as bad as the last time I had to go. A peculiar thing happened this evening. George was with me while I was packing my overnight bag ready for an early start. He said something really strange. "You can tell Sarah that I'll talk to her tomorrow night, after I see you." That was all.